I think the meals that I'm the most excited about are the ones where I'm able to just say, this is truly locally grown within a mile, and to know exactly where it came from. It's very satisfying.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions and Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 132, and my guest is Becca Griffith. Becca is a longtime food educator, health practitioner, and foraging enthusiast in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Health challenges in college led her into this foray into real food and a lot of F words, as she puts it. She now heartily embraces food, fats, and foraging. Today, she shares her own perspective on the latter in particular. She gives us a better understanding of what it means to forage, to find nutrients in the food that is growing all around us. You are going to get caught up in Becca's enthusiasm and quirkiness in today's discussion as she dives into her own story, how we can become better aware of nature and our own surroundings, and how to help us locate and pick our own food and the very foods that might be growing right in our own backyards. Before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. The Wise Traditions Podcast is brought to you in part by Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant, the probiotic everyone's talking about. Go to thriveprobiotic.com. And Green Pasture. Green Pasture products are inspired by the research of Dr. Weston A. Price. Traditional diets were much more rich in vitamins and nutrients than our diets today. This is why they offer fermented cod liver oil, concentrated butter oil, and coconut oil in a variety of products and blends. Boost your health today with wholesome, healthy Green Pasture products. Go to greenpasture.org for more information. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Becca.
Thanks, Hilda. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here too. Listen, this is a topic of great interest to me and to our listeners because we want to be as independent, with our food freedom as we can. And it seems like just foraging and getting things out of the wild may be the way to go, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Talk to us a little bit about how you got going in this field of foraging and stuff. Didn't it have something to do with Fiddlehead ferns? Tell us that story.
So a number of years ago, I had moved onto a property that had formerly belonged to my grandparents, and they had just all of these ferns, and they were so invasive. And so I wanted to just dig them up, clear them out. All I knew was that they were ferns. That's it. And then after digging up a number of them, I had gone to Whole Foods and saw something that looked quite familiar. And I also saw that there was a $19.99 per pound sign above them. And I'm going, wait a second. Did I just dig up $20 a pound vegetation? So I went back home. I got on Google, started figuring out, did I really do what I think I just did? And sure enough, I did. So I'm running downstairs, back outside of, I'm going to save you, and just tried to salvage whatever I could of those. And from there, it got me thinking, and that's what started it all off. And I looked for everything and anything that could possibly be foraged and been doing it ever since.
Well, this is the thing, though. I don't judge you for not knowing that fiddlehead ferns could be eaten, because most of us see things in our yard growing and just think, let's eradicate them so we have that nice green lawn. We have no idea what we're doing, do we?
No. Yeah, I know. It's like everything that comes up as this weed, if it's not a blade of grass, oh my goodness, eradicate it. And I've moved since then from that property, but I would let the lawn grow a little bit longer so I could get more of the weeds, especially in the springtime.
A lot of us know about dandelion greens, for example. We do know that you can eat those, and they're kind of chic and hip, right? But what other things besides those and the fiddlehead ferns should we be looking for, Becca?
I suppose it's going to depend on each region of the country, or I suppose for any international listeners, a part of the world. But at least for me, I'm coming from Minnesota. Minnesota. So in the Midwest, besides the dandelion greens, there's curly dock is another one. And unfortunately, of course, we can't show pictures, but I encourage all of you listeners, write down these names, Google it, and that's a great way to get started. And that way you can connect with, oh, that's what that was. So curly dock was one, lamb's quarters, nettles is another, and violets and violet leaves. Those are edible as well. I know a lot of people get those. So those are a few just off the top of my head. I know there's many others.
Now, are there people who can live off of these things, really? I'm just picturing, like, if someone were really hungry, could they make a meal out of some of the things they can just find in their yard or in their neighborhood?
Depending on the abundance and depending on, too, of their neighbors and how their neighbors treat their lawns, aka glyphosate sprayers, and how the wind and the rain might pull it over into someone else's lawn. But I think it's possible, not necessarily high in protein, but especially if they were to add in the mushroom component, which always should come with the warning of get involved with a local group that is well educated in mushrooms, because that one is a little bit riskier if you misidentify a particular mushroom. But yeah, I think it's possible for certain portions, especially again in the Midwest where we've got all four seasons. Certainly not in the winter time here, but for myself, I can say that in about a week, because right now in Minnesota, it's the first week of May, and we're just starting to get vegetation. The green is coming out. I would say in maybe a couple of weeks, that's where I can make the bulk majority of my meals with just about everything foraged minus the protein part.
That is so cool. I'm remembering when I was in Nairobi with Mary, a friend of mine who is a Weston Price member and was going about with me talking about nourishing traditions everywhere we went. I remember we were walking past some flowers. She literally like plucked one off the little flower bush and stuck it in her mouth and started eating it. We were all like, what? I think it was like a hibiscus or something.
Oh.
That's an edible flower, right?
Yes. Yeah, it is. It sure is.
But what is it about us that kind of feels like everything's safer if it's neatly packaged and in a box in the store? What kind of got us started on that track, do you think, Becca?
I think we've just been shaped and molded into that through all the messages over the decades, and that, and we continue to hear it, with the recent outbreak with the romaine lettuce or, past with the salmonella and spinach. We just keep hearing these things, these outbreaks, even though, a number of us already know vegetation can't produce that on its own. Where are they getting this manure that they are spreading around that's creating that contamination? But I think some of it would be the fear tactics that are put out there that, it's just better to have a regulating force, or just the traditions of our ancestors of what they used to do haven't gotten passed along. And as well as the natives of North America, we just haven't been able to reap the wisdom that was practiced for centuries. And I know there was also this quote that I came across in one of my favorite books. If you're familiar with Jo Robinson, one of the books she wrote was called Eating on the Wild Side. And this quote just jumped off the page to me when she wrote, "We have been breeding the medicine out of our food for thousands of years." And I just started thinking about that that's yet another reason why foraging, if we can allow ourselves to start experimenting and learning little by little the names of these quote unquote foreign objects that we come across and start connecting with them and understanding what they can do for our bodies, for the terrain that we're walking on, and just the ecosystem in general, because these are things that are not being hybridized. Foraging was just a way of life. And, like with nomadic tribes, they were just moving to wherever the vegetation was. That was the survival. And gardening wasn't a thing at some points or some regions of the world at in time. So when you think about foods that we're going out looking for that haven't been hybridized or cultivated, and again, this goes back to the book, Eating on the Wild Side. I really do encourage everyone to pick it up, buy the book or look at your local library. And again, the author is Jo Robinson, J-O. And she goes through and she talks about how before a number of the foods that we're so familiar with today, before they got hybridized, the nutrients were just off the charts in comparison to what we have available in our stores today. The bigger it is, the less nutrients there are. And so that is yet another component that drives me into foraging. Now, of course, the nutrients are going to vary depending on where you're foraging. You can forage anywhere. There's even through the cracks in the sidewalk, vegetation, greenery, everything is looking to come up and show life. And if it's something that's, been covered in cement or tar or, other toxins, you probably don't want to forage there. But if we're talking about marshland areas or preserves and things that just haven't been sprayed, and it's just sort of this closed circuit system where the majority of things haven't been picked and it just dies at the end of the year, gets cold and it starts over and those nutrients go back into the soil. Those levels stay about the same and you're getting more nutrition, more bang for the buck, except no buck is necessary.
Hey, I get it. If we are indeed hybridizing these plants and lowering their nutrient value, certainly that wasn't our intention. What were we after when we started changing these plants?
It seems really flavor. Our palates have been more drawn towards, boy, if that's tart, or oh, that's bitter, where other cultures really embrace bitterness and tartness, where I think because we had a taste of refined foods like the white flours and always wanting something sweeter. So if we could cultivate, if we could hybridize, if we could change and alter the genetics, the expression of anything that we're consuming, it always seems to be if we can make it sweeter and bigger, then it's going to be better. So I think that's one of the motivators, because I just look at, with corn, the sweet corn that we have today is not even remotely close to the corn of yesteryears. And if people from, even the 1800s were to see the apples that we have that are completely normal to us now, their jaws would drop of what on earth, but I am certain they would have loved eating them too, because again, they're so sweet. So I think it's just having that taste of what's possible and then having the chemists, the scientists that are able to play around a little bit with the genetic expression.
So you've given us a taste of what this kind of life is like, where we're not manipulating plants, but we're indeed finding them in our neighborhood and in our surroundings. If we wanted to really get going with this kind of foraging or wilding lifestyle, what should we do first, Becca?
I love that question. I really think the easiest way to start venturing into foraging, especially if you've never done anything like this before, start with the dandelions because you know what they are. And just Google dandelion leaf recipes or dandelion root recipes. And then from there, every time you see a weed, whether it's in your yard or you're on a walk, take a picture of it. And I love the day and age that we're living in because there's all these groups, especially, Facebook groups where there's plant identification. And I actually started doing this last year, and boy, my knowledge base grew exponentially compared to all the books and things that I used to, well, and still do, go through. But I would just take a picture going, wow, I never noticed that one before. And you submit it to really this group that's international. And all you do is you get a close up of it, maybe take a couple different shots, and then you say where you're seeing this, what part of the country, the city and the state, and then you wait for all the responses, and people even give you the response of the proper Latin name. And then you go again, just go Google it. And then The other way, at least for my own learning style, that has been extremely helpful is I pick up a lot of foraging cookbooks and I will just flip through them. And when I see something new of, oh, that's what that is. And oh, I'm motivated by, I can make something. Oh, that dish looks delicious. I've got to go find that. I'll wait until, that time of year when it's growing. And then I'm able to go make it. But I've found that especially when I'm cooking with these ingredients, then I'm able to personally connect with this particular plant, I guess. Sometimes I feel like calling it a weed is insulting it. But when I connect with it by cooking with it and eating it, I'm literally internalizing it and I have a relationship with it. So when it has that identity, it's something that I've said every now and then where, you can go to a conference, like when we go to the Wise Traditions conference, especially if it's your first time and if you went by yourself or you're going by yourself and you see this mass of people and they're just a mass of people. You don't know them, but they're just people. And as the weekend goes on, you get to know each other and start meeting a few your first year. And all of a sudden you have a relationship with them. And then as you go every year, all of a sudden you just got this family, this tribe, and you can connect with them and you have that relationship. And it's the same thing with all vegetation is when you look out, you just see, oh, some of these are really pretty and wow, what is that? And then you've got that relationship and you look forward to going back every year when foraging starts up in the spring and build on that and build your relationship with more of the plants, more of the vegetation, and a greater appreciation for them.
Coming up, Becca discusses a good way for all of us to ease into this foraging lifestyle. We want to pause now and thank our sponsors, Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Most probiotic pills just pass through our bodies without achieving the desired effect. Just Thrive is the first 100% spore-forming probiotic that arrives alive in the intestines naturally. It supports optimal gut health, digestive health, immune health, and delivers antioxidants. It is great for adults, kids, the whole family. The probiotic everyone's talking about. Just Thrive Probiotic and Antioxidant. Visit their website at thriveprobiotic.com. And Green Pasture. Green Pasture sells a variety of products to boost your health. Organic virgin coconut oil, virgin coconut ghee, skincare balms, and much more. Their fermented cod liver oil comes from the prolonged soaking of wild cod livers in brine, which allows cod livers to naturally ferment. It's a gentle process compared to that which is used by most highly industrialized cod liver oil manufacturers. Personally, I take their cod liver oil daily, and I rarely get sick. I am so thankful for Green Pasture's thoughtful, traditional practices and products. Go to greenpasture.org and place your order today. Good relationships take time to build. So it would be easier for me to go to the grocery store and buy that Fiddlehead fern than it would for me to wait for the right season and see where it's growing, right? This takes some time, doesn't it?
You know what? You bring up a really great point, and I would even say that is actually another great way to start becoming familiar with foraging. And it's a motivator where, for example, just right now at our co-ops, one of them specifically, I know the prices because I've been checking it out. You could go there and you'll see the morel mushrooms and they are $49.99 a pound. And you look at it going, oh, is that worth it? But, it's not guaranteed that people can find the morel mushrooms. So you get familiar with it. Spruce tips are about $20 a pound. Fiddlehead ferns are currently there, $22.99 a pound. So you look at it, you get familiar with it, and you buy a small amount so that you can afford it. But then you're able to go, oh, I know what that looks like. I know what I'm looking for now. So this is a great time of the year to be able to go into the grocery stores and just be able to see it, to feel it, and grab a few and cook with it and know that maybe you'll run into it this season or the following year when you start going gung-ho on it.
It reminds me of this kind of dating app thing called It's Just Lunch. And the idea is you just go out for lunch. And then if you like that with someone, then you see them again and again. And so in a way, this foraging thing really is a relationship. Like at first you're just identifying, kind of checking out the scene, right? And then later you're like, hey, let's hang out, let's have a meal. And the next thing you know, you're like, I love this. And I can't wait till it's Fiddlehead fern season again.
And then you start marrying all of the vegetation.
That's taking it too far. But I totally am grooving with this because I was thinking when we shop at the grocery store, it's a very sterile experience, isn't it? It's kind of, like you walk down the aisles, you have no idea where this food came from. And sometimes they'll say blueberries from Chile, but you're not really experiencing what you're buying in its context, where it was grown. You don't know who picked it, right? There's so much that's missing from the equation.
Yeah, that's so true. And that I love. I think the meals that I'm the most excited about are the ones where I'm able to just say, this is truly locally grown within a mile and to know exactly where it came from. It's very satisfying.
And it's probably the most nutrient dense because it's so fresh.
Exactly.
I was just now in Cuba. Oh my goodness, it was an amazing experience. But I was on a particular farm. We had this amazing spread for lunch, Becca. Every single thing on that table was from that farm. It was so satisfying and so rich. And they even told me, because they have those same Brix meters that measure the soil, and they were like, the Brix meter for these tomatoes is like off the charts. Like 2 or 4 is good. And this was like an 8. And I was like, yes, like they weren't just serving us what they happened to be growing, but they knew it was quality. It was organic. It was fantastic. So
wow.
That actually leads me to my next question. Like, is it considered foraging if you start growing some of these things yourself intentionally?
Oh, I was wondering if I was going to end up bringing this one up. I guess it would fall under the category of gardening, but I guess it could be argued either way, because one thing that I'm getting ready to do is I just bought a number of mushroom spores. My parents ran into this issue where they kind of got taken by these tree cutters who they cut down a number of these gigantic oak trees in their yard, but they didn't finish cleanup. And so we're right now in the throes of trying to figure out what to do. And I don't know, the timing all just kind of converged in my head, and I go, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I could go buy mushroom spores because a number of them grow really well on oaks. So as soon as it comes in the mail, I'm going to be inoculating and preparing a number of these oak stumps and logs and growing a number of varieties of mushrooms there. And I was thinking about that would that really be considered foraging, considering I'm forcing different varieties of mushrooms on there? So I guess it's sort of pseudo gardening, but Well, the other thing is ramps. I did take some ramp roots or the bulbs and planted them last year in hopes of them coming up this year. So yeah, I guess it's up to anyone to decide if it's really foraging or not.
Well, and the truth is we sometimes get too caught up in becoming purists or elitists in this whole foodie movement, don't we? So maybe it doesn't really matter in the end. The idea is to nourish ourselves and our community as best we can with what we have at hand.
Yeah, I think if we can get more variety of foods into our diets that are coming from nutrient-dense soils that are alive, then no matter what's growing there, and if you prepare it properly according to its design, wow, yeah, that's it. I mean, that's the name of the game, is us remineralizing and putting in the nutrients that have been missing for generations in so many of our bodies.
Absolutely. And you said the word game and my mind went to hunting, because I wanted to ask you, how is hunting like foraging? Do you link the two at all in your mind?
They go hand in hand. I think a lot of hunters, and I just last year for my very first time, I was going out and actually preparing for a documentary of being a non-hunter and becoming a hunter, and just seeing how hunters do things and found that so many of them are foragers. So they do go hand in hand. And I think there's also another interesting angle to that, because even though if one is hunting animals, it's not necessarily known where those animals have been eating. Did they run into a nearby cornfield? Especially if it's a deer and they're ruminants, and ruminants and grains don't mix. But it's still that same premise of getting things that are cleaner. And I think foraging is the same thing for hunting animals. It's just foraging for animals as long as it is done sustainably and as humanely as possible, taking your time. Don't shoot at anything and everything that you see.
We're not talking about hunting for the fun of the kill. We're talking about hunting to feed people. And actually, I've heard of communities that send hunters out to kill the deer, and then they use the venison to serve to needy families. Have you heard of that?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
I think so too. People complain about the deer eating their plants and stuff in their garden. And there is an overpopulation. Perhaps the predators have been eliminated as we've kind of extended our housing developments, right? So why not have the animals serve people who are hungry? There's food right there. As a matter of fact, I've seen movements of people turning their yards into farms and gardens. Have you seen that, Becca?
Oh, yeah. I live in an apartment now, but I've thought about, and then I would love to just go get my own property and convert that into just a beautiful, functional, edible garden. And that would be satisfying.
So I have two final questions to you as we wrap up. Number one, this is seriously no pun intended. What is the wildest thing that you've eaten since you've kind of gotten into this foraging, hunting stuff?
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind, I would say it would be chicken of the woods, which is a mushroom, and not to be confused with hen of the woods. And that one was a semi-risk, but after Googling and doing the best that I could, this was a number of years ago, I was able to detach it from its home and slice it up and make a number of things. But as with anything, you kind of have that cringe factor as you see sometimes a few little bugs crawling around in it and pulling it out. But I think that, at least in the foraging world, was probably the one that would have been the most exciting to me.
Maybe we can put a little picture or a link in the show notes to the chicken of the woods. It sounds intriguing.
Oh, yeah, I've got a picture of it.
Oh, good.
It's beautiful.
Send it to me. Actually, another question came to mind as you were talking. Becca, have you ever gotten in trouble for foraging? Can people get in trouble for this kind of thing?
No, I've been stopped a number of times, but not to be scolded. I've had people say, "What are you doing?" or "What is that? What are you picking?" And sometimes I'll be thinking, "Oh no, I don't want to tell them because then they're going to come pick it." But one thing that I learned after the fact is that in national parks, you're not supposed to be picking anything. And while I would say, "Oh, sure, yeah, of course, I would have known that," but I didn't know that about the berries. So that one, when I was picking out in Glacier Park over the last number of years, nobody's ever said anything, but it's one of those where, it's a disappointment. But nobody, thankfully, has ever yelled at me. And if anything, even for what I would call urban foraging by neighbors who they're sick of the fruit on their trees. How is that possible? But I guess it is. Where I've had friends and neighbors just encourage me to come into their yards because they don't want to mow the lawn after it drops and get, mulberry sauce or applesauce going on.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that funny that people would get tired of the very thing that can sustain them right there, right?
I don't understand it.
So now I want to ask you the question I often pose at the end of the program. Becca, if the listener could do one thing, we usually say one thing to improve their health, but in this case, I'll say one thing to take a step in this foraging direction. What would you recommend that they do?
Easy. Just go outside right now after this podcast is over and go look for something that you do not recognize. It shouldn't take too long. Go take a picture of it and go look on Facebook and have them help you identify it. And then go on Google and look for a recipe and make something with it.
Awesome. And when you guys do, post it on Instagram and use the hashtag WAPF for the Weston A. Price Foundation. And we'll be looking for those and maybe we can repost them or something. That would be really fun.
Oh, yeah. 'Tis the season.
And we'll tag you, Becca, okay?
Oh, please do.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. We look forward to seeing you soon at the conference, probably this November, right?
Absolutely.
All right, friend. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Hilda.
My guest today was Becca Griffith. You can follow more of her foraging and other food experiences on Instagram at GriffithBecca. For the show notes and highlights from this episode with links to resources that we mentioned, just go to our website, westonaprice.org, and look for the show notes for episode 132. Hey, and if you're enjoying this podcast, go ahead and subscribe through Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a thing, or subscribe through your favorite podcast app. You can also rate and review our show in iTunes. Every review lets people know that this show is worth listening to, so thank you in advance. You can also help spread the word about wise traditions by sharing episodes on social media. And speaking of that, you can follow the Foundation on Twitter and Instagram at Weston A. Price for updates on ancestral health topics and other information. You can also look for us on Facebook at the Weston A. Price Foundation. Next week, I have a fascinating conversation with Kiran Krishnan. He's the microbiologist that we've had on this show before. He and I spend this time talking about glyphosate, what it is and how it impacts our health. You guys, Kieran is a fount of knowledge. I can't get over how much this man knows. And he really breaks it down in terms of the dangers that glyphosate poses on our health, how it's almost everywhere, but what we can also do to protect ourselves from its negative effects. Hey, and a big thanks here at the end of the show to Podcast Village, to my friends, both Robs, and the team of interns for the show, Cynthia Castro-Cohen Enriquez, Joy de los Santos, Amy Marvin, Deirdre Beard, Diva Rizzi, Melanie Ahern, Mary Hine, and Olga de Villiers. Last but not least, everybody, give me your feedback. I'm available to you at Holistic Hilda on Twitter, at Holistic_Hilda on Instagram, or just visit my website, holistichilda.com, so I can support you on your wellness or podcasting journey. Thanks, everybody, and keep listening.
Did you know that there are Weston A. Price Foundation chapters all over the U.S. and around the world? Chapter leaders help you find good food in your area, and some have meetings you can attend. Go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on Find a Local Chapter to see if there is one near you. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.